Okay.
8.1.
Yes, 8.1. So calling back to order. Chair Jen is away momentarily, so I'll pick up the chair. We're looking at request for decision, adoption of electoral area A, B, C, and D, respective regional parks and regional trail service establishing bylaws. And Melanie did a lot of this work. She's not available to us today, but she will be on tomorrow. We looked at these at the EAD.
These are now for adoption, so they've gone
Yep.
through third reading and was
So
been
it's
approved by
just-
the province of the inspector of municipalities has approved these services bylaws, so these are here for.
I'll move adoption.
Great.
Can I do all of that at one time?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, yes, Kristen says yes, so moved by Director Mack, seconded
second
by
the
Director
facts.
Rainbow. Is there any opposition? Hearing none?
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, this is excellent for area A, and I presume for B, C, and D also. Now it gives us an opportunity to move forward and develop some parks in our area.
Yeah, it's area B. I'm
Excellent move.
thrilled about it too. Now, there were a couple of small details in there, like Tyaks is listed in area B and it should be in area A, and I just thought I'd follow up with Ms. Helmer on that.
Sure.
Okay, they're just small typo kind of errors. 8.2, a request for,
Sorry, can you call the question?
call the question. Nobody was opposed. Carried.
Thank you.
Now, Lillooet Campbellswick TV and Radio Association, 8.2. Motion to adopt this. It was approved on September 13th by the ministry, so that's terrific.
move
Moved
it.
by Director Demare, seconded by Director Mack. Discussion. Opposition. Seeing none, that motion is carried. Melanie's not here, but I just would like to thank her. She did a massive amount of work on this, painstaking work. And also the community of Pavilion had to contribute quite a lot in terms of the information and so on. And so it's been a very big job going on behind the scenes, and I'm really grateful that it's done. 8.3, request for decision, adoption of Squamish-Lillooet Regional District Economic Service Establishing Bylaw 1782-2022. This is Area B and District of Lillooet. And moved by Director Reeve, thank you. Seconded by Director Demare. And do we have opposition? No question. Motion carried. Now. Shall I carry on to 8.4?
Yes.
Request for a
The board so
decision?
desires.
I'm just thrilled about those last things. Prairie Creek Neighborhood, OCP and zoning amendment, third reading and MOT approval 125. We have for a staff presentation. A little late, but please go ahead.
Let's wait for the presentation to load here and we'll check to make sure. Yeah. Like, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Claire Dewar. I'm the senior planner here at the SLRD. And the Prairie Creek Neighborhood OCP and zoning amendment bylaws are being presented for third reading. I'll give a brief staff presentation, really focusing in on the input received at the public information meeting, as well as the public hearing. Present some proposed amendments to the bylaw reflecting that public input. Speak to some additional items, and then take any questions. So sorry, just went through that. So just a really brief background. I think we're all pretty familiar with this application, but there's 419 hectares in Prairie Creek. It includes zoned and unzoned land, designated planned community under the OCP and master planned under the OCP and master plan under the RGS, and to date, about 150 residences have been built. So there are current approved development and obligations which provide for 920 single-family, multifamily residential units, resort hotel units, 1,400 meters squared of commercial space, golf course, marina. The current community amenities include a fire hall, community center, administration office, public works yard, and there is a 5% park dedication required. Noting that the current approved development rights are pretty focused on single family dwellings. There's no maximum house sizes, there's no affordable employee housing, childcare, school, transit, active transportation. These are things that we've been working to address through this zoning amendment process. So this is the current zoning. So just mentioning some of the policies that we have as staff to look to when we're looking at this zoning amendment application. The policy around sustainability and land use in our OCP directs growth and intense development to areas designated as master plan community, and to ensure that such areas engender the emergence of complete communities. And then it sort of calls out what the complete community designation is. And specifically in Prairie Creek, there's policy that the neighborhood of Prairie Creek should consider undergoing a process to develop appropriate zoning. So the house sound, we have a house sound needs sub-area plan that includes the communities of Britannia Beach, Prairie Creek, and Porto Cove. And we have an RGS that designates these three communities as master plan communities. Under the proposed CD3 zone, we have zone areas. This is showing what these areas that are largely unzoned would look like under the CD3 zoning. The illustrative site plan to try and bring that to life a little bit. This slide was actually really helpful at the public hearing to really hone in on some of the building height conversations and clarify what building heights are being permitted where. And to note that in the section 219 land development agreement covenant restricts the construction of all buildings to that 6 stories or 20 meters until there are fire service available to accommodate any taller buildings. So I maybe won't get into what the proposed development amenity conditions look like. I think we're all pretty familiar with those. I can go back to any of this information too if the board has questions. Just comparing sort of the current development rights and what's proposed under the CD3 zone. We really see the addition of 120 non-market affordable dwelling units and much more multifamily development. Just a quick timeline, so we're all on the same page here. We have been looking at this application since March of 2019, when we first received the development application. And then from 2017 to 2020, there were proponent-led community consultation, various meetings. In July of 2021, the board gave first reading. In June of 2022, the board gave second reading. In July of 2022, there's a proponent-led public information meeting. And then on August 11th, the public hearing was held. So what happened at the public hearing? And just to touch on quickly, there was direction at second reading from the board. We had resolutions specific to the community center and increasing the size of the community center to a minimum of 475 meters squared. There was also the board resolution to remove the provision of 5 large single family dwellings. And there was a resolution requesting the geotechnical hazard study in advance of third reading. We also received some of the board members requested more details around active transportation infrastructure, and some concerns were raised around how House Sound East developments would contribute to Jessica Squamish recreation and library facilities. So the public information meeting was held on July 28th. Approximately 70 members of the public were in attendance. Some voiced concerns around the Prairie Creek commercial use definition, park and ride, view impacts of the village commercial size and location of the village commercial, increased traffic and congestion. Others voiced support for the application and process, and there was also input around opportunities for additional park and open space programming. So in terms of the public hearing, which was held on August 11th at the Britannia Mine Museum, there were approximately 80 members of the public in attendance. There were 55 written submissions received. 43 were in support of the application, with one submission representing 56 property owners from Oliver's Landing Strata Council, one submission in support representing 6 residents, 8 submissions were in opposition, with one submission representing 15 property owners from Ocean Crest and Uplands, and one submission representing 5 property owners from Ocean Crest. And there were 4 submissions just dealing with various aspects of the application, and then 3 submissions were received during the public hearing before the close. In speaking or looking at the public hearing input, before I get into sort of the aspects that are specific to the development application, I did want to mention we did receive input around concerns with the public hearing process and the lack of virtual attendance options, as well as the lack of recording. And there were also some raised concerns that all the SLRD directors were not in attendance. And I think one thing that staff would note to some of that process concern is that it's been our practice to hold either a virtual or an in-person public hearing, as we don't have the technologies in place to offer hybrid meetings in our electoral areas. We did choose to hold this public hearing in person, and that we did receive quite a few, 55 written submissions in advance. So there is always that option to provide input to a public hearing through the written submission process in advance. And I'll get into just highlighting some of the public hearing input that we received. We did receive some concerns around the village commercial location, its size and view impacts. And I'm not sure if the board wants details from a staff perspective around responses, or we can just highlight some of the concerns. I'm not sure how much detail we want to go into here. Maybe I'll just provide a little snapshot, but when we look at the current location for the village commercial, it is based on the original preliminary layout approval that was submitted with the as part of the master planning process, with those original plans that were approved by the Ministry of Transportation back in 1991, and it had this the current area as designated as community area as part of that original process. And throughout I also note that the RC3 zone and the RC4 zone, which are actually adjacent to Oliver's Landing, do allow for ground level commercial. So there is opportunity for commercial in other parts of the neighborhood. And we have some, options through the zoning to address some of the view impacts around building height and also at the DP stage. Concerns around size, I'll just note that the SLRD board and agents, and through the agency referral process at first reading, recommendations to increase the village commercial size to create a more complete community. So that's where the increase in size came from. The community center was also increased in size based on board input. Concerns around park and ride, largely aesthetic, and we can deal with a lot of those concerns through screening, green roofs, green paving, all to be addressed typically addressed at the development permit stage. So we are recommending adding those requirements into the land development agreement. And I'll also note that with respect to the park and ride, MOTI and BC Transit both reviewed and supported the transportation hub, its current location, its plans. There was the request from MOTI to increase parking to provide for trailhead parking. So that's part of the rationale for the size of the park and ride. And there is the ability to phase that park and ride to have it grow with the community rather than having a big parking lot while the community hasn't been built out yet. There were concerns raised around highway and traffic safety. And I think here staff really looked to Ministry of Transportation and through that first reading referral process, they confirmed that they don't see any, that the current infrastructure that was built was based on the current development rights. So they did not see any need for a new traffic impact assessment or any, that the Highway 99 improvements were based on the full build out. So they don't anticipate any traffic issues. And so that was confirmed once again in August of 2022. There are also concerns noted around the childcare location and proximity to the highway, and also questions around school-age childcare facilities. From a staff's perspective, the current location for the childcare facility, and I'll note that's 37 spaces, and additional 37 spaces will be located throughout the neighborhood. But there is seen as co-benefits of locating next to the community center and village commercial and transportation hub. So there are a lot of benefits to having that location, and then the drawbacks around traffic related air pollution, noise can be mitigated largely through design. And then the piece around school age childcare facilities, that they're not contemplated at this point in time until we know if the school will be built, and then we can explore having those facilities adjacent to the schools. And there are questions around the timing of the BC Transit pullouts, which just to confirm that those have all been supported and recommended by BC Transit. There were questions around the net zero and sustainability, which I maybe won't get into. Water supply, just to confirm, or for staff can clarify, that the land development agreement requires wastewater flow and water consumption monitoring to ensure that capacity of the existing systems is adequate, and that if expansions or upgrades are required, this will be at the developer's expense, and we have covenants in place for those expansion lands. And then there were questions around waste management and climate change adaptation, and we have the form character and conservation DP process will largely address those concerns. In terms of questions and comments, there were questions around the phasing and building heights, fire service commitments, the suggestion to prioritize teachers for affordable housing. I'll just note there that if there is a school, then that they will be considered a Prairie Creek employee and prioritized through that process. And any teacher in the school district 48 would also be just on that prioritization list, but just further down than Prairie Creek employee. There's also a suggestion around dog park, which we've added, and a suggestion to increase the size of the waterfront South Park, which we have also been able to do. Just touching briefly on some of the support that we heard, there's highlighting the numerous benefits around fire safety, commercial space, and subsidized transportation. The importance of expanding community infrastructure and amenities was also highlighted, which was seen as resulting in less highway trips. The support for a mix of housing, including affordable housing, seemed to bring younger people and families to the community, and to allow older residents to downsize and age in place. Support for the proposed location of the village commercial was also shared by some, and it seemed to increase the viability for businesses and accessibility for residents. Importance just in general of completion of development at Prairie Creek. So a number of residents have been sort of waiting for their community to be built out. Also, their support was shared around the opportunity to spread property tax load and increase property values, opportunity to reduce home insurance costs and improve fire safety and services, and then appreciation of the processing and engagement opportunities to date. And there is the full public hearing submissions and minutes are included in Appendix C. Just wanted to highlight some of the proposed amendments reflecting this public input. So the Prairie Creek commercial use definition, the proposed amendment is to remove the service station. And then I also wanted to clarify, because we had concerns about cannabis retail being located at in the Prairie Creek Village Center or Village Commercial Area. And just to clarify that under the Area D zoning bylaw general regs, the cannabis retail is prohibited, and so they'd have to go through a site-specific rezoning if that use were to be located in the commercial. Active transportation commitments have been added to the Schedule B12. The off-leash dog park has been added to the Schedule B13 amenities. The village commercial building height, we've added language to the CD3 zone to state that the number of stories in the C1 zone area, so that's the village commercial area, shall not exceed 1 story as measured along Prairie Creek Drive, and with the exception of the childcare facility. But so the developer is willing to reduce all the village commercial there to 1 story to help mitigate some of the concerns from adjacent community residents, view concerns and whatnot. The other piece that staff is proposing as an amendment is to add a minimum of 1,400 meters squared as well as the maximum of 23 meters squared of Prairie Creek commercial use, which would allow for phasing of the commercial. So we heard from the community members, some are really concerned about the size of the commercial, feel it's too large. And if we have a minimum and a maximum, it may just allow for that to get built out over time. We also have added screening and landscaping requirements, which, as I said, we typically deal with at the DP stage, but to provide further assurances, we can add them to the land development agreement. We have increased the size of the waterfront South Park requirement to 1 hectare, which is up from 0.4 hectares. We've corrected a mapping error on lot 27 Stonegate Drive, and this is reflecting a future process that we may go through around potential lot line adjustment to increase the viability of that park. Updated some legal descriptions, and we've updated the natural hazards protection development permit area to add information on the geotechnical hazard assessment, and specifically the map 16A to include the area A landslide hazard. So just wanted to clarify procedures after public hearing, that under the Local Government Act, after a public hearing, the council or board may, without further notice, adopt or defeat the bylaw or alter, then adopt the bylaw, provided the alteration does not alter use, increase density, or without the owner's consent, decrease density of any area. So confirming that the proposed amendments comply with the Local Government Act requirements. And that Fine Peace has agreed to the proposed decrease in building height for the village commercial. Okay, so looking at these additional items, I'm not going to get into this whole slide, but just if we look at the 1 in 10,000 geotechnical hazard study, pretty technical report, and really what is a 1 in 10,000 geotechnical hazard study, and it's looking at considering the potential for catastrophic landslides based on a probability of occurrence of 1 in 10,000 per annum, which is a 0.5% probability in a 50-year period. So that kind of made more sense to me thinking about that 50-year period piece. And really this study is meant to guide MOTI in their assessment of the proposed development. And just to clarify, this level of study is really for large scale developments. We don't see a different level of probability hazard used for the building site level. So in terms of conclusions from that study, the potential for catastrophic failure of a semi-detached rock bluff at Area A may be greater than 1 in 10,000 per annum based on the results of our preliminary analysis. This is direct quote from Thurber, and that the analysis further shows that however, that an approximately 6 meter high subvertical deflection berm located along the eastern property line of the proposed developments along Seaview Drive would be sufficient to contain the slide debris based on a 1 meter freeboard. Noting that detailed design work of this proposed mitigation measure would have to be completed at the DP stage. However, it is our opinion that the deflection berm could be easily designed and constructed to mitigate a potentially large scale rock slide from Area A. So I think the points to highlight here around how this study has now been translated into our natural hazard protection development permit area. We are the boundaries of the natural hazard protection DPA landslide hazard areas have been revised to include this Area A catastrophic landslide hazard zone. So that's the map 16A has been revised to include that area. And the actual DP now include details around the mitigative measure that are being recommended, such as the deflection berm that would be required for any of those building lots to be built on. I also want to note that the staff confirmed that the potential Area A landside hazard does not impact the fire hall site. So this Area A potential catastrophic landslide area is in the collector area, which is where the fire hall is located, but it is further to the left. So that was just an important thing for staff to confirm. And then I think I'll leave it at that. If the board has further questions around the around this study, happy to answer them. I think really this study is what MOTI will be looking at as part of the referral after third reading. And if the MOTI staff have any issues or concerns, those will be brought forward, and they won't approve the bylaw if there's any outstanding pieces associated with this geotechnical study that come forward from the Ministry of Transportation staff perspective, and that's really part of the subdivision. Informs the subdivision approval process. So, and this is just a map showing this sort of where this Area A hazard is. I'm not sure if the board can see that, but it does affect some of the lots in the collector area. So, and this is showing the unmitigated case. And so you just see that some of the lots in that collector area would be potentially unbuildable without being mitigated. The fire hall site is not impacted by that. Active transportation, this was something that came forward at second reading, and we are able to come back and confirm and highlight really some of the information that was sort of buried in our land development agreement. But there are 19.8 kilometers of sidewalk, bike lane, and off-road trails are included in the plan commitments. These are both in the CD3 zoning and the land development agreement. We've updated. Oh, and just to confirm too, that the standards are based on BC's active transportation design guide as recommended by Vancouver Coastal Health and MOTI, and that formal transportation plans will be required with each development permit application for subdivision. And just so we can see where this wasn't included on this schedule previously, and so now we've mapped out where this network will be sort of where it lands in the Prairie Creek neighborhood, and the yellow is showing the active transportation network being the bike lanes. So we can see the communities will be pretty well connected. I'll note too, like there are a number of off-road trails that are provided in addition to that sort of yellow, which is highlighting what would be taking place in the road space. There's some of the other just examples. We have these commitments in the land development agreement, but just looking around standards. So then just wanted to touch on impacts of the Area D development on District of Squamish. So the District of Squamish sent a letter, which was also a submission as part of the public hearing package, which is also submission to the public hearing. And the letter identified impacts of Area D developments on Squamish and requested a staff-to-staff collaborative process to develop a preferred option for SLRD board and District of Squamish Council consideration on how to mitigate the regional impact of these developments on Squamish. Currently the SLRD contributes to the operating budget of the Brennan Park Pool through the Squamish and District Community Swimming Pool Local Service Area Established bylaw. That's been in place since 1990. The existing SE bylaw 438 applies to the pool area only, not the ice rink fields or any of the other facilities in Squamish. In 2022, Area D residents contributed to 154,000, just over 154,000 of the total $1.87 million budget. Once again, this is specific to the swimming pool. Area D, noting that Area D and District of Squamish residents are requisitioned based on the same rate per thousand of assessed value. And that as assessments increase in Area D, so will the allocation of funds. And then noting, you know, some of our conversations with Jessica Squamish staff is, you know, what will this look like as the communities are built out? And we were able to look at the fiscal impact study completed by Ben Struth Consulting, and they looked at, you know, this is specific to Furry Creek, what the current contributions were in 2020, and then projects that out to 2035. And in 2020, contributions were 41,000, and the projected increase would be to 142,000. That's out to 2035 once the community was built out. And the Britannia South contributions would likely be in the same range based on units and unit mix. And so that's once again specific to the Brennan Park swimming pool. There are, the SLRD contributes to 2 existing cost centers, and there are, and as well as annually through grants and PILT funds. Just noting here, I guess that we did meet with, SLRD staff had preliminary meetings with District Squamish staff in August and September. There are no statistics at this time around the use of Squamish Parks facilities and cultural programs by Area D residents. Just because Squamish staff believe that the Area D contributions to parks facilities and cultural programming should be increased, and that the existing SE bylaw does not adequately capture the possible impacts to other just because Squamish recreation facilities, programming, capital improvements, as well as arts and cultural facilities and programming. So these are all identified as gaps to these staff-to-staff discussions. And noting that District of Squamish staff have requested a commitment from SLRD to revise the current funding model to expand contributions and scope based on these identified gaps. So in response to the letter and the staff-to-staff conversations, the staff recommended resolution to address this is that staff be directed to continue their discussions with District of Squamish staff to define specific impacts on the District of Squamish that have yet to be addressed. Just also wanted to touch on briefly the development permit areas that we have that will be covering Furry Creek. We have the form, character, and conservation, which will address design and sustainability details. We have the environmental protection, riparian area protection, wildfire protection, and natural hazard protection DPAs. And these DPAs will be required at subdivision and building permit stages. So there's another opportunity at some point in the future. This would be an opportunity for the board to and potentially the community to get into some of the design aspects for the neighborhood. And these are just the recommendations if we needed to sort of go through any of them. So we have them on screen on hand, but really I will leave it there and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. The Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, thanks for the fulsome report. We had touched on previously in second reading the location of the school building being outside of the Furry Creek development area. And so I'm just curious, with it being identified as one of the requirements in the land development agreement, are they then responsible for securing that land through the Crown, or how does that work?
Thank you. So through the chair, the requirements under the land development agreement of the developer are to provide a ready to build site and access and water and servicing. They are not required to undertake that process with the Crown. That would be on the SLRD or the school district 48. I'm not sure entirely on that process.
And have we received a response from school district 48 at all in this process?
No, school district 48 has not provided any input to any of our referrals or indicated whether they would contemplate a school there at this time. Staff are ensuring there is a site in case we need one at some point in the future, but school district 48 has not requested one.
Thank you. Yep.
A couple quick questions. The height of the building is tied to the ability of the fire services. does that mean once fire services, once a new ladder truck that allows you to get 10 floors or whatever is purchased, and they have the ability, does that mean it automatically triggers the ability to build the taller building, or would those taller buildings then come back to the board for discussion?
The zoning allows for the taller buildings, and we just have a covenant in place that restricts building above 6 stories until there are fire services that are added there.
So it automatically triggers. The private shuttle, that's been discussed as an option. How does that get tied? Does that get tied to the housing agreement so that it's offered in perpetuity, or how does that work?
So through the chair, the private shuttle is required to be in place when the first residents move in, and then it's required to be in place until BC Transit Service is in place to serve the community.
So it's required up to that point. Okay, great. The cannabis site specific zoning. Are we setting ourselves up for more work down the road, or should this be considered in advance of, so that once we start going through the motions of setting up this development, that we don't have to go back? And so I'm just wondering if it's more work to look at this in advance as part of the zoning, or what the logic is behind site specific.
Sure, thank you. So through the chair, that site specific piece, that is across the board in Area D. We've just said if there's going to be cannabis retail, it needs to be considered on a site specific basis, largely because we have very limited commercial in Area D, and that we would want to make sure that there was, all the parking and whatnot to support that use. And what we heard from the public is there are large concerns around potentially having a cannabis retail located there, and think that would actually be preferred from a community and staff perspective to take place outside of this process.
Okay, just a little curious about that. It's a legal product, and if we're going to choose to restrict one sort of commercial sort of, should we do the same with the liquor store perhaps? It's just a thought in terms of how we're approaching it, and I don't want to get us in a position that we finish all this and 2 weeks later somebody puts in an application and now staff have to go through a major process with the board of looking at site specific zoning.
And thank you through the chair, that can be looked at through a separate bylaw amendment, that because right now that clause is just like in the Area D zoning in general. So if the board wanted to remove that provision in the Area D zoning bylaw, that is possible.
Thank you. I might have more of us. Stop for now.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Yes, Mary Lee.
The changes made since second reading now create a min and a max for the commercial, but the board was really keen to try and add commercial space to make it a more complete community. So how does it protect the board's desire to see the max space built out if it just says a min and a max, but you don't have to build it out over time? Like the language doesn't say you need to reach the max. It just says there's a min and a max.
Yes, thank you. So through the chair, this was staff's approach to try and reflect public input as well as board input. If the board were to direct, we can remove that minimum piece as well. That's at the board's discretion. It felt like it was a way to allow phasing and to see if there was viability to build out that much commercial. But if the board wants to have that much commercial built, we can remove the minimum, we can just have a minimum of 23.
Could I just ask, is there wording that would allow us to keep that phasing? So to say minimum start is whichever numbers in the bylaw, but phasing will be considered to reach the maximum, which is expected, or I don't know what the wording is, but could we just change it that way so that it still addresses the community's desire to maybe not see it all built at the beginning, but the board's desire is to make sure the commercial is there. So I'm just, would that wording be on side in a bylaw?
Yes, I'm through the chair. We'd have to turn our mind to whether, like, where we can reflect that.
Yeah, I mean, typically zoning would specify a minimum, maximum, or both. if you wanted to compel a developer to build a certain amount of commercial, you'd have to work that into some sort of agreement. But what we heard from the community, quite a few people were concerned about the amount of commercial being requested. And so this, as Ms. Dewar said, it's a way to alleviate some of the community's concern and by creating a minimum. The minimum is exactly what is required now in the current agreements and zoning.
Through the chair, there could be another, we do have, commercial is allowed for in other zone areas at ground level. And so perhaps there's a way to ensure that all the commercial isn't just built at one location as a way to address some of that community input around the concern of increased size at one location. But if it was throughout the community a bit more.
The use is allowed in those other zones. But we've focused the language around the hub,
The village.
the village center. But it's technically allowed in some of those other areas where we have multifamily zone.
Director Rainbow?
This kind of comment that one of the residents in Prairie Creek is a commercial realtor. And when this was discussed, there was some opposition to expanding the commercial area and some resentment that the board has said it has to be done when the residents didn't want it. Her comment was the market will drive it. That it's good to have the language in there to allow for that. But entrepreneurs, the marketplace will decide whether it's developed or not. So we can say it has to be there, but we can't force people over to business.
Do you have other questions for staff?
So I just have a clarifying question, because I think I heard two different things about the commercial. The board established a higher number. And staff are now providing a minimum. But the max that's listed there was the number the board was requesting. So one of the ways we could do it is just to take out the min. Just to keep it simple, and it's allowable anywhere in the zone already where commercial is allowed, so it doesn't all have to be there.
That is correct, yes. Through the chair, that's correct.
So we still meet the needs of the community. The market drives it, but we still need to see it over time, but it doesn't all have to be in the village commercial area.
Yes, that is correct. I'd have to double check. I believe the previous wording might have set a minimum. So anyways, the way it's now, we can have a maximum of 23 meters, which to
You have
your
a minimum of 23.
You require a resolution to make that so?
Part of third reading, I think.
I don't want to have this conversation if you're going to require a resolution to make it happen. Because the developers always want that they have to subsidize the commercial all the time. So sometimes for years. So they don't. If they can build less, they will. And if they can build it later, they will. But we set the timelines and expectations.
I think Director Rainbow?
I just wonder,
Were you done?
No, I was finished, yeah.
Okay.
guess I go through the chair. I'm just trying to figure out.
chair.
Yeah. So are we saying that it has to be all built immediately, or are we phasing it?
I don't think that was. I didn't hear that.
Which one?
No, it was a minimum. I think what my colleague was saying was the maximum should be the minimum. This is what you build. This is the square footage of commercial that you build. Build it when you when was not attached to it.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, just the maximum be the minimum, under no minimum. Build this.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, I was part of supporting the idea of increasing this commercial space. And I think the idea was that there is the capacity down the road if the community and the market decide there's a need for it. It was just to make sure that I felt that what was originally allotted might not allow for natural growth over time. So it's not a matter of building it all at once in a huge commercial space that's not needed right off the hop. It's to allow for the natural growth over time. I think that was the goal of the board in putting that in there. It's not attached to a time.
To the chair, I've got a question. Ms. Stewart. So we're talking about a minimum and a maximum for that commercial hub. So that area is dedicated to commercial, whether it's that lower number or the higher number, correct? So no housing units can go in there. It's designated as commercial.
So through the chair, at the village commercial, so we have various uses, and there are different uses that are envisioned at that sort of village center area. Some is community and some is commercial. And we have a childcare facility which falls under the commercial use as well.
So through the process, that area will stay the same then?
Correct, yes. Yeah, so it does, sorry, through the chair, the zone area is designated C1, so that's for commercial.
Yeah, I've got one more question. If we make a change to the text of that element, would it have to go back to public hearing?
It's through the chair, if it's not altering use or density, then no. And at the public hearing, the language was still held that 23 meters squared.
Yeah, thank you.
Is that it for questions? Should I trade places back with Chair Board?
You're doing a great job.
Relax when we're gonna.
The lights, I'm starting to fade here.
It's almost like in there.
Hey, great.
I just couldn't see the screen.
Oh, agreed. But now I'm.
Well, now I can see you.
Yeah.
All right. Where would you like to go from here?
Get on the comments.
All right. Well, we don't have a motion on the floor.
Well, not motion do what?
Another question? Go ahead. Another
Uh,
question.
yeah, sorry, just another quick question through the chair to staff. There's the final motion on the agenda speaks to some of the feedback and comments that we heard from the District of Squamish. Can staff just speak a little bit to what they see as like the timeline for those discussions, or what that really looks like from the motion as presented? When might we have something back to the board as per that motion?
Through the chair, where we left the discussions with District Squamish staff, I think there was agreement around kind of focus around, and this is communicated in the staff report as well, but there was agreement on wanting to focus on recreation facilities, acknowledging that just having a service establishment bylaw in place for the pool alone, there's a lot that's being missed there. And that also arts and culture isn't fully being captured. So I think there is, agreement around some of the gaps. I think where we're trying to figure out the next pieces that we would need to figure out is around what is that financial piece, like how much are we talking about, and then if we're depending on the tool that we're looking at, what are the geographies, and then how that would when that would all start coming into place, I guess.
Okay, and then just a follow-up question. There are a number of requirements that are still required before adoption. I'm just curious, of those requirements and a development of this size, how long does that typically take? Do we have any sense of when we might see that back for adoption?
Yes, thank you. So through the chair, just so that we are all on the same page, one of the requirements prior to consideration of bylaw adoption is the source water protection plan, which would require review and sign off from Vancouver Coastal Health. There have been some field work sort of going on now, but that source water protection plan hasn't been prepared yet. SLRD staff hasn't seen that, so that's one piece. And there would be work on the 2 covenants to bring them from draft to registerable form. And the other piece around the, if should the board give third reading and direct the referral to MOTI for sort of the MOTI has to approve the bylaw, so that would happen if we have third reading and that referral is submit. And that would involve them reviewing the 1 in 10,000 geotechnical hazard study, which would take some time. I can't say what the turnaround time for that type of referral is, but it's months, like I'd say.
I'm just looking at the bylaw language specifically around the commercial area. And under 16.3.8, it says the following standards apply to the village commercial area. A minimum combined gross floor area of 1,400 meters squared and a maximum combined floor area of 23 meters squared of village commercial use is permitted in the C1 area. So that actually, if we want to attain that 23, but we want to allow them to build it out anywhere, with that clause in that section, aren't we now limiting it to the commercial village area, the village commercial area? And I think that was the challenge people were having at the public hearing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's an elegant way for me to change that, unless we could find another place to.
Yes, so through the chair, that is correct, that 23 meters squared is specific to the C1 area. We do have commercial use permitted in a couple of our other zone areas, but that would not be captured in that 23 meters squared.
No, I'm wondering if we can have a short recess to figure out how we might alter the wording. Because I don't want to just start messing with a bylaw that has probably been through legal review. But I also believe that the board was really keen on expanding the commercial opportunity, but also out of respect for some of the comments at the public hearing, I just want to make sure there's flexibility there. So it doesn't all have to appear in C1, and how it's written right now is that it all has to appear there. So I don't want to create that motion on the fly, but like.
We could do that too, yeah, depending on the way.
I'll just add that the developer in our discussions with them would be more than happy to reduce that commercial density. They only added to the commercial density on that particular in that particular zone at the request of the board. So I'm sure I really don't see that they would object to a reduction if the board were to wish to reduce that number now.
No, that's the exact opposite direction. I want to take out the min. I want to keep 23 as the minimum. But out of respect for some of the feedback we got at public hearing, I don't think it all has to appear in C1. The way the bylaw is written, though, is that it ties it to the C1 commercial area, but we have other zones in the development where it could go over time. So I just wondered if like a 15-minute recess would allow staff to look at that, and then we could come back together.
That's good.
Do we want to maybe bring it back tomorrow for that?
Well,
Just 'cause I'm-
So, yeah, we,
3:30.
yeah, like we have a hard stop at 4 o'clock. We have, I think, dealt with one item. I want to give staff the time, as you suggest, not to do this on the fly while we're throwing ideas around. Do you have a question or are you trying to respond to this?
It's not the question,
Okay,
Mr. Chair, it's not a question of responding, but just sort of to add to this, is that there was some misunderstanding, I think, at the public hearing about the commercial space, and there were comments that it had been moved from Oliver's Landing and plunked in this new space. There is, in fact, in addition to the C1 area, whatever it's called, in the hub, there is still a 4-story building adjacent to Oliver's Landing, where the top 3 floors are residential and the ground floor is commercial. So I don't know where that shows in the bylaw. It's not a change, so it's probably. I'm talking about that, the 4-story building on lot 4 down by, that's still in place, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. So there's the RC3, which is that lot 4, and the RC4 both provide for village commercial use at the ground level.
Yeah. Do you know how big that is offhand?
It's not a lot of commercial space. It's probably like 4 or 5 small commercial units.
Yeah.
The development of the 23 in the C1 zone doesn't preclude other commercial development in the area.
I suppose that's the clarity I'm looking for, because it's only listed here, so. For the members of the Prairie Creek community, when they see that it's the minimum, so if we establish the minimum as 23, that allows the developer to put it in this other building at Oliver's Landing.
You can do so anyway. It's an allowable use in the other zones.
Okay, so the right thing to do is just change 6.3.8.1.
16.3.
16.3.8.1.
A minimum combined gross floor area, strike a minimum.
No,
And
keep minimum.
keep the minimum, sorry,
Yes,
keep the minimum. Combined gross floor area, remove the 1,400. And just,
and remove and a maximum.
yeah. That's reasonable.
I still think it makes this all appear in C1. And that's
Just wouldn't it be better to have up to that 2,300?
Can we,
So what are we
sorry, okay, we're gonna recess. I'm imposing a recess. Do not make any more comments at this point. Let's. There, the green light. Do we still have Barb with us? You can hear us, Barb. I see live on the screen. I see everybody ready to go. All right, so I would put forward a motion to defer the remainder of this discussion to tomorrow's continuation so that staff can carry on. We have a number of items to still accomplish today. So the motion is to defer the remainder of this discussion. Seconded by Director Demare. Any comments? I guess we don't comment on deferrals. Call the question. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Do you want to jump to 8.7 for Alex?
I think or 8.5, I think.
8.5 is the Lillooet Lake Estates Heather Jean Properties Land Use Contract Bylaw and proposed zoning and OCP amendments for second reading and public hearing waiver and notifications. And we're going back to Director Needham.
Yeah, so this has been before you a few times and we've just proposed a few amendments to the bylaws based on input that we had at a public information meeting. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Being none, I appreciate the amendments that you've made in consideration of the comments from the property owner numbers. I think that's a good result. Go ahead, Director Mack.
I will move this,
We'll move
but
this.
so do we have to do this? Can we do all of that or do we have to do them individually? Because we're rescinding and.
Rescind. And then I think they're gonna have to be done.
Okay, go one at a time just for
Yes,
clarity.
thank you.
Okay, so that second reading of the bylaw is rescinded, moved by Director Mack, seconded by Director Birch Jones. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. That the bylaw 1721-2022 zoning bylaw be amended and given second reading as amended, moved by Director Mack, seconded by Director Birch Jones. Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. That the second reading of the bylaw 1722 be rescinded, moved by Director Mack, seconded by Director Birch Jones. Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. And that the bylaw 1722 be given second reading as amended, moved by Director Mack, seconded by Director Stoner. Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. And that the public hearing for these bylaws required be waived with appropriate notification, or no, be scheduled and advertised as appropriate with Chair Mack presiding. Moved by Director Mack, seconded by Director Rainbow. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Great. Okay, we're moving along to 8.6. Director Birch Jones, go ahead.
I'd like to request that this be deferred and referred to the Area B Agricultural Advisory Committee. They're a really terrific, committed group of volunteers. They've done a lot of work on this. I consider these to be considerably more than housekeeping. Some of the items we've had discussions on and the decisions at the AAC aren't reflected in what I'm seeing here. And so I would just like staff to have the opportunity to meet with the AAC and go over this before it comes back to the board.
Just for clarity, we're not deferring, we're referring.
Referring, please.
Referring.
Yeah, I'd like to refer this to the Area B AAC.
Moved by Director Birch Jones, second by Director Rainbow. Go ahead. Question?
Just through the chair, want to check if we could just amend the recommendation in front of us. And bring the bylaw back to a future board meeting for consideration of second reading after engagement with LAPS. So that we can give direction to keep moving it forward, but we'll get the feedback from LAPS at second reading.
I think I'd feel like kind of a schmuck if I pass this the way it is.
No, no.
We're not passing it, we're referring, it, but keeping
But the
intention the
the
same.
intention is to move it to second reading after engagement with LAPS. Bring it back for second reading after engagement with LAPS.
Actually, not last so much as the Area B
Oh, sorry,
AAC, which does include some representation from LAPS, and they also are pretty important players.
That would work, I think.
Yeah, as long as there is the opportunity for the AAC to have the opportunity to comment and perhaps make some changes and.
I'm gonna go to Director Needham.
Yeah, so I'll speak to this. These changes did go to the AAC, just for the board's information. So there were just what happened was when we referred the bylaws to the professionals at the Ministry of Agriculture and the Agricultural Land Commission, they suggested that what the AAC, our Agricultural Advisory Committee, was suggesting were not best practices. And so I'm not sure, it's basically, do we want to go with the decisions of our AAC, which is volunteers that sit on a committee, or do we want to look at the best practices of the professionals in the various agriculture departments of the province? So there were just a couple of issues. One was really about whether we require farm status for a secondary residence. Some on the AAC had said, well, we don't think you should have to have farm status. And the ministry is saying, no, you really should, because that's the only way we can control this is if somebody has a farm status. Otherwise, anyone can just get a second dwelling. And then there was some issue with split zoning, and the ministry has basically said that we should apply a single agricultural zone to land within the ALR. So that's basically the point of this report, is we're bringing back this to say, we've heard different from our AAC. Now we've heard from the province, what do we want to go with? Because I just don't think going back to the AAC at this point is gonna, they sort of had their kick at the can with respect to these bylaws. And it's just a difference of opinion at this point. That's why we didn't change bylaws. We just wanted to bring it.
Thank you. I'm gonna go to Director Richmond, then Director Mack.
We heard from the AAC, we heard from province. I'm getting the sense from the area director that what we've heard from the province, she would like to take back to the AAC before we move ahead on it. And so I respect that direction. I don't, because we can give first reading and adoption on the same day, I don't know if we need to have a big conversation on first reading or second reading. I think let's follow the direction and just say, let's refer it, and it can come back for first, second, and third on the next meeting. Yeah.
Director Mack, then Director Stoner.
Yeah, so the deal with the split zoning. I disagree with the AAC on that. If you have a 25 or a 50 acre parcel, 10 acre parcel, and half of that is perfect farmland, okay, that's farmland. But if you have the other half, which is solid rock, that's not farmland under any condition. And for them to say that it's just, it should be all the same, makes no sense whatsoever. Because here we are, we have a housing crisis on our hands, and they're telling you can't build a house on a rock pile. That's just crazy. So we need to work and get that. Common sense should prevail here, folks. So we need to change the AAC's mind on this, and maybe they're doing it just because it's easier for them. But that's makes no sense to me.
We have Ms. McKay here. Ms. McKay, have you been following the comments so far so that you can weigh in on what's been said? Because we want to hear from you.
Yeah, I've certainly been listening. Thank you through the chair to the last couple of comments. Director Mack, are you referring to the ALC, the Agricultural Land Commission? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that, I mean, there were two real key concerns that were raised both by the Ministry of Agriculture and Food and by the ALC. There's the split zoning concern, but there's also the minimum parcel size for new subdivision. And I would say the minimum parcel size for new subdivision is the one we really need to look at, because essentially what the ALC said is that it's highly unlikely if we put that in our zoning bylaw and we say that the minimum parcel size for new subdivision in one of the agricultural areas is, say, 2 or 4 hectares, that can't actually get provincial approval. So, or is extremely unlikely to get provincial approval. So it creates a situation where we are somewhat potentially misleading the public who are looking at our zoning bylaw and assuming that they're going to have that ability to subdivide to that level. So I think that that's where those comments were really coming from, is that we want to make sure that what we're putting in our zoning bylaw is consistent with the provincial regulations, and we're not encouraging people to apply for a subdivision that's never going to go anywhere. And the split zoning piece, I think that was from the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, those comments, but basically the concern is that in some scenarios, you could potentially have up to two dwellings, a single family dwelling and the secondary dwelling built on one portion of the parcel and two on the RR portion of the parcel. So 4 dwellings in total, which does have the potential to really have an impact on whether or not it's being used for agriculture.
The reason that I asked for this to be referred to the Area B Agricultural Advisory Committee is because I really consider them to be a group of experts. And when one of them explained to me and the staff at the last AAC meeting why the split zone was problematic and what the advantages could be this way and that way, I thought they made a very good argument. I mean, the larger problem is that we have mapping problems with the way the agricultural land is laid out in Area B. That's the first thing I'd like to solve. And then we can sort of work along from there. But I don't really want to sort of go piece by piece with staff here at this table when we have an expert committee duly convened by the SLRD to give us some advice on agriculture in Area B, and I will take their advice and try and bring it forward. I think that's the best I can do as the Area B representative, right? So,
Okay,
I think it needs to be discussed further at that committee level with staff until they can come to, you know, perhaps a better understanding.
Ms. McKay, did you have your, I feel like you were gonna say something.
No, I think I can leave it there, just the summary of the key comments that we heard, and we can take it back to the AAC. I will say that I think some of these issues are things that we have had detailed conversations with the AAC about previously. And what we're hearing now is the professional opinion at the provincial level from the referral comments. And the AAC had requested that if any substantive changes were going to be made to the bylaw, that we would be bringing it back before them for prior to adoption. So there is still that option in the staff report as well.
Okay. Any other comments? Where are we at? We are,
Did we amend this motion?
no, we haven't put a motion on the floor.
Yeah.
Sorry, yes, we did. We
Motion
motioned to
to
refer.
the Area B
And then we
AAC.
had a seconder.
Yeah, yeah.
And now I'm gonna call the question on the motion to refer. Is there anyone opposed? You're opposed? Thank you. Also opposed? No. Okay, motion carries.
I thought there wasn't an amendment.
She's
Okay.
This was it. Also, Ms. McKay. Yeah, okay. We are moving along to 8.7 because this is Ms. McKay's last day. So, and this is her presentation to us. So I would like to turn it over to Ms. McKay on 8.7, which is the affordable housing amendments for Area C. I know we gotta roll, but let's get this part done, please.
Hey, thank you, Chair Ford. I'll be very brief in my staff presentation. So this report and bylaw was last before the board in July, and I'll just go through, it's now being brought back before the board for consideration of second reading and scheduling of a public hearing. I'm just going to speak very briefly to the changes that have been made since it was last before the board in July. So this document now includes a draft Section 219 covenant, housing agreement, and statutory declaration. I do want to mention that it hasn't had a formal legal review yet. That will be something that staff pursue if it's given second reading today. There were also a couple of pieces that were essentially conversation around the board table in July that staff felt needed to be addressed in this report. and as well as in the bylaw itself. So the first of those was looking at the rental cap number. So we had previously proposed doing 30% of the low and moderate income limits that are coming from BC Housing. And the conversation that we heard at the board table was that that was still coming up with a relatively high number in terms of what the rental pricing would be. So we went back and talked to staff at BC Housing and looked at what some other local governments were doing. And we're basically, what BC Housing suggested is that you could kind of move within a couple basis points of that 30%. So we're now looking at 28% of that low and moderate income limit, which drops the rental pricing down a little bit to kind of bring it a little bit more in line with being not quite at market, so a little bit below market rental pricing. And then the other one was, there was some conversation around the discharge of covenants and the fact that that is an option within the resort municipality of Whistler. So whether the current owner enters into the covenant and then down the line wants to change that and discharge it, or someone that purchases the property down the line wants to remove the covenant. Essentially what the RMOW does is they set it back in the day at $150,000 was the fee to discharge. So in 2022, that's about $220,000. So we're suggesting that for the SLRD, a similar fee be set should someone wish to discharge the covenant. And any money that was collected through that process would be put into a reserve fund, which would be used for affordable housing in the region. So I think those are the key pieces that I wanted to speak to, and then happy to answer questions.
So this going forward now, if this is passed, we'll go to a public hearing, and the concerns or comments raised at that public hearing, then we'll come back. And so what's being presented now could be changed and amended to cover those off, correct? Okay.
Correct. And this has actually gone to a public hearing before. It went to public hearing in April 2021. So as it stands, it includes all of those comments have been addressed in the current version of the bylaw, but it needs to go to another public hearing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So just so it's clearly laid out, the idea behind this is that if somebody wants, if we're trying to incentivize that if somebody's going to build a second suite or a second suite, it doesn't take away from their square footage, therefore they can add it to the footprint of the building. So we're trying to incentivize that way. Am I right that the only checkup we have is through the statutory declaration in terms of ongoing after that? So we're relying on people to fill in their own stat decks, and that's it. We don't have any other sort of follow-up as an organization to make sure that this space is actually being used for long-term rental, or is there another mechanism?
Thank you, through the chair. So I think in the absence of proactive bylaw enforcement, then the statutory declaration does become our primary mechanism for ensuring that it's rented in accordance with the agreement.
And so thank you. Follow up to that, today we talked earlier about bylaw enforcement, that in some cases it was a recommendation from the AD that in some cases it'd be proactive. I'm just wondering if there's the ability, I'm not saying I necessarily want to go that way, but I want to know if it's a possibility that this would be included in sort of that proactive umbrella if we chose. I'm just trying to protect against people building monster homes under the premise that they're going to rent it out, and then they find all the loopholes to just expand and have a monster home. So stat deck is one tool. I'm wondering if there is another proactive method that the board might want to consider. I don't want to suggest it.
Ms. Through the chair, Ms. Dean, do you want to speak to that in the context of that bylaw officer, please?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, when somebody in a small neighborhood is violating our bylaws, we usually hear about it from neighbors. So, I mean, at some point we could consider looking at revising our bylaw enforcement policy with respect to these, but right now we're dealing with things mostly on a complaint basis or on a staff observation basis.
Yeah. And one last question if I can. The discharge at 225, Ms. McKay said it was sort of based on a little bit on the 150 previously by Whistler. Is that the only way, like, is that the only sort of rationale for that number? Because again, these are pretty wealthy properties. generally gonna attract very wealthy people, and I'm wondering if they have the ability to meet that discharge so that they could have their monster home. So I'm just curious how we got to that number and whether it's the appropriate number, or if the board wants to consider another one.
Yeah, I have a question to follow on that. So in the event that someone builds the space, given that they have this covenant, it's required to be a rental suite. Should they discharge the covenant at a later date after the space has been built? Does that space become illegitimate space that then has to be deactivated?
False.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. McKay.
Thanks. So just to address that quickly, I did actually ask that exact question to the planning staff of the RMOW to see what they were doing. And my understanding is that there is the option in the RMOW to do it that way. Like you would be able to discharge after the fact when that space has already been constructed.
Which is what we've encountered, and people have discharged the space, which then they have further growth, the gross floor area than they would have had, because this is a bonus. This isn't within the existing space. So go ahead.
I just want to make sure I understand. So they build a house, they get, because of this provision, they can add a bit to it.
Yeah.
As soon as they built it, they then discharge it, so that becomes part of their house.
Yeah, which is my question and
So is there a way then that you can put some sort of time limit, impose some sort of time limit there that if you're going to have this space, it has to remain there for 5 years before you can discharge it? Something like that.
Go ahead, Ms. McKay.
Thank you, through the chair. One potential option we could look at is only allowing for the discharge to enter it as a market rental. So not allowing them to discharge it and remove the suite and incorporate it into the main house. We could only, yeah, because there's basically two reasons that you'd be looking to discharge. So one is to increase your gross floor area of your primary residence, but the other is that people might want to discharge so that they can just rent at a market rate.
Right. You could also require that the discharge only can happen before the building is built, so that they cannot build the space and then discharge it after the fact and fill it in with sand. Is that right, Ms. McKay?
I think, thank you, through the chair. In this case, it's a little bit different because the RMOW ones that have that discharge option are mandatory suites. So there are specific neighborhoods in Whistler that have the requirement that you build that suite. In this particular case, we're giving property owners the option to build the additional suite. So the only people really, I think, that would be looking to discharge is, say someone opted into that program and then decided 5 years down the line that they no longer want to participate, they would be looking to discharge, or a future owner. But I think these are going to get built under this scheme before people would be looking to discharge, because it isn't a mandatory program, it's an optional one.
I'm uncomfortable. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to see some more security around it. I mean, these homes are gonna be anywhere from $4 to $10 million. So in relative to that number, $225,000. So I don't feel it's secure. You know, the whole idea of this process we're going through is to secure more below rental market. That's why we're doing it. So I want to secure it. So I would like us to consider additional security within this. That says discharges either at a higher price and or it has to be deactivated, or anything else staff might suggest along those lines to further secure it in perpetuity.
Okay. So the
Make a motion to send back to staff.
Send it back to staff to come back with further securities and provisions in place to ensure that these units become below market rental and not additional gross floor area. Okay.
Looks like you have to stay another month there.
Yeah, sorry, Alex.
Yeah. I don't think I'm available next month.
I'll call the question on the motion. Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. Ms. McKay, thank you for all of your work. We wish you the very best for the next 18 months. You don't have to say right now. But we do appreciate the work that you've given to this community, and we are very, very lucky, and we look forward to seeing news very soon. I'm sure you do.
Hopefully
too.
not too soon. But a couple weeks, a little bit of a break, but yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's been great working with all of you over the last year, and I'm sure I'll see many, if not all of you, when I come back next year.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to recess the meeting.
Motion to, I'm just jumping ahead to, recess, item 15, motion to recess the meeting until 10 a.m. tomorrow or immediately following the committee of the whole.
That was a motion moved by Director Richmond, second by Director Birch Jones. Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all. I